In a galaxy that relies on hyperspace travel, one of the most important infrastructures were spaceports. These starports were necessary for civilian travel, military activity, trade, and even illegal activity. But with almost 500 known spaceports in the entire galaxy, it's a given that they weren't all created equally. In today's video, we'll rank all known spaceports from the most impressive down to the ones we guarantee you've never heard of. In the top tier, we've included only a few spaceports. Some make sense, like the 33 spaceports of Coruscant and Corellia's 8, including Coronet City Spaceport, Port of Corellia, Corvella Starport, the Shipwright Auxiliary, Port Pivaria, Tyrena, Behare, and Incorporation Spaceports. These two Ecumenopolis were the heart of the galaxy, two of the richest planets to have ever existed. An unbelievable number of people and cargo went in and out each spaceport by the hour, making them undeniable champions of this list. Almost at the same level, we'd have to place the 7 spaceports of Naboo. Namle, Quillan, Moenia and Kadra starports, Onoam and Rogoz starports, and Theed City. Much like Corellia and Coruscant, Naboo was filthy rich, and that reflected on the quality of its ports. All these spaceports would be the most accessible ports in the galaxy, with connections across every sector. Traveling to one wasn't only safe, but gave you instant connections to all the various districts and amenities the world had to offer. Some more S-tier spaceports were the 8 ports of Kuat Drive Yards and the Drevstan spaceport on Bothawui. Not only were many of these rich, but they were also crucial for military and intelligence respectively. Across the many millennia of galactic history, they never stopped being extremely popular, sometimes for all the wrong reasons. Then there's Nar Shaddaa and its multiple spaceports, Deosalon, Mazenti, and Nar Shaddaa spaceports, which was the filthiest hive of scum and villainy in the galaxy. Billions traveled to the smuggler's moon, either seeking some illicit recreation entangled with the underground, or even seeking refuge. Many spaceports were located near cantinas, promenade, or casinos, making them very accessible for patrons stepping off their vessels. In our opinion, we also have to include the Dreshte spaceport on Korriban and the Dramund Kar spaceport. Not because they were particularly large, but because both Sith planets are incredibly cool, and we are simple people. Finally, our final S-tier spaceport has to be the Adalon spaceport, which connected by a whisper transit to the neighboring city of Balderdash. And if that isn't an S-tier city and transportation name, we don't know what is. Next, in A tier, we're placing spaceports on influential worlds that mattered in one way or another, but couldn't match the likes of Coruscant and Corellia. That would include Aziz Starport on Onderon, the Keldaba spaceport on Mandalore, Knossa spaceport on Ossus, Zalzak and Zakfra City spaceports on Thyfera, and the 4 spaceports of Kashyyyk, the Kachiro Starport, Maytel Base, and Thikiana and Wukruo spaceports. We're also going to include all of Alderaan's spaceports in the Aldera, Sanctuary Coast, Rue Canis, and Pallista spaceports. Normally, we'd say Alderaan is an S-tier planet, but it loses points for getting blown up. Here's where we'd also place all the main core world spaceports. Being in the core gave them more resources, more access to trade, and easier networking with other worlds. That would include Charbi City Spaceport on Volta, Rol Yarn on Kalimar, Emita and Hana City Spaceports on Chandrila, the Nayli Spaceport on Nayli, the Fondor and Foles Spaceports, Sakoria Central Spaceport, and Brental 4's 4 spaceports, Brental Spaceport, Oridin, Votrad, and Independent Downport. Diarik has the Diarik Starport and the port of Quaestar, Utharis has Taldak Station, and Talus has the Nashal Starport. Then, there's also the old Duros Spaceport, which had been crucial in early galactic exploration. Nubia had the Nuba City Spaceport in the Corellian sector, which is always prestigious. There's also Recopia's Thorin Spaceport, Voktunma's Starport, and the planet Essalus along the Polemian, which has the Kuramel Intergalactic Spaceport and Esselis Starport. Finally, N'Zoth has Haris Downside, and Belgoroth only had one civilian starport, Belgar Spaceport, and it connected to the only decent cantina on the planet. Although less central, Capital City Spaceport on Lothal, Raxilon on Raxus Secundus, and the Chiss Ascendancy's Sasapla and Ibian spaceports were also highly influential in their respective regions. Despite it being an Outer Rim world, we'll also include Elrud and its 4 spaceports here in Dinbar, Elrodan, Elrudin, and Lodos, as it was a planet well known for immaculate starports. Finally, we have the spaceports that simply speak to us. That would be Anzat Spaceport, which was the only place on Anzat you were remotely safe from being eaten by the Anzati, Black Spire Outpost in the Outer Rim that was named after the stunning petrified trees, and the Abrogado Ray Spaceport, which was completely controlled by the Pike Syndicate and sounded like a very exciting place to be if you're into that sort of stuff. In B tier, we've placed a lot of different types of planets. Starting us off, we have worlds like Tatooine, whose traffic ebbed and flowed, but was still a relative powerhouse compared to other Outer Rim worlds. That includes the Anchorhead Spaceport, Bestine, and all the different Mosses, Mos Eisley, Enther, Espa, Illa, Osno, and Tomro spaceports. Other spaceports that fit that category were the Arkan 4 spaceport, the Boztrock starport on Klatooine, and even Nal Hutter's spaceports, as the world wasn't nearly as well connecting or welcoming to offworlders as Nar Shaddaa was. That includes the Bebusa, Jehuna, and Kedriga spaceports. Then there's the Forest Valley on Brosi, Gunung Spaceport on Tirgan, Hikahi on Mon Calamari, Junction Port, and Ryloth's 2 starports, Lesu Spaceport and Kalaun. Liana had Lola Kuchich, Southwest 1 and 2, and Angzata Spaceport. There's Northwest on Landra, and Kawan City Spaceport, when it wasn't infested with Rackles. Balmora was also once very important, and it had Sobrik Spaceport. Similarly, we'll include Arcania's Novania and Scaparus Port, as Arcania used to be a very interesting place to be, especially when it came to science. Iliad also had a spaceport and was a wealthy world of exiled nobles known for its key imports of luxury goods. Another category of planets we'd strongly place in B tier were those spaceports that pushed back against the Galactic Empire, either harboring the Rebel Alliance, working against the Empire, or outright rebelling. Many of these worlds aren't especially strategic in their importance, but fighting against tyranny is an S tier trait, so in our opinion, the two balance out. That includes Kalna Mun on Agamar and Estaria Central Starport. Shrenda on Merakai saw a mass demonstration against Imperial humanocentrism, and the Ditani Diplomatic Landing Circle helped Rogue Squadron. We have Quenin on Daltara, Fabrillan City Spaceport, and the Gorman Spaceport that also held a peaceful protest against the Empire that ended in a massacre under Tarkin. Heloda on Katada was allied with Leia Organa, Havoc Outpost was a rendezvous point for the rebels, and Hervak Spaceport served as a hub for the Alliance to move supplies around. Rhodia may have been under Imperial occupation, but Rhodia's home fleet headquarters put up some fight. Finally, Leotos Spaceport provided maintenance for Alliance ships. Without the risks and sacrifices these lesser-known spaceports were willing to take, the fight against authoritarianism would have been much harder, so we think they've earned their place on this tier list. The next category we'll put in B tier are all worlds that were very important during the Clone Wars. We are, after all, a Clone Wars obsessed channel, and this tier list is a bit biased. That would include the Eriadu Planetary Security Launchpad and Felar Spaceport, Celast's 2 ports, Sulon and Pinyam Spaceports, Gorilla Spaceport on Raltir, Jagani Port on Decivro, even if it was a swampy mess, and the Livian Magnus Spaceport on Ord Radama. Merge Spaceport, meanwhile, had allied with the Separatists. Of course, we also have the Throne Spaceport on Faline, as well as Sereno's Corania Spaceport and Mantero Cemetery Spaceport. Vased Spaceport was on the eponymous world during the Clone Wars, and Seleucami, one of the most famous war theaters, had Seleucami Town and Teleucama Spaceport. Mercana Landing was heavily targeted by the Republic, and Malastare has Port Pixelito. Finally, although these were important later during the Galactic Civil War, we'll also put the moon of Endor Spaceport, Bakura's Lesser Grace, and Sulis Dar Spaceports here. And finally, we've also included some mid-rim and inner-rim spaceports that sounded like a pleasant place to visit. The Ephevan port on Vorjid 5 was well connected to the city's casinos, the Morrow Spaceport was one of the busiest ports in the Bright Jewel sector, and Terraphon had Warrow Field in the Hapan system. There are also the two spaceports of Argao, which are the New Escrow Spaceport and New Escrow's Old Spaceport, amusingly enough. C-tier is where things start to get more complicated. C-tier planets aren't particularly bad, but they also aren't particularly good. This is where we've put most worlds that had a moderately okay location and didn't have anything especially bad about them, but none of these spaceports was particularly amazing to visit unless you had a very specific purpose. To start with, we have the Outer Rim world Coin, which sounded like a fairly pleasant place to live. Coin had 6 ports: Akrates, Skrajtes, Krontes, Entrates, and Krates. Algara 2 has Algara Spaceport, and Skrika has Talos. There's the huge commercial Cialasil Starport and Iago's Cliffhold, built into a basalt cliff and struggling after the spice trade dwindled. Simbark has the Dakota Spaceport, which had a casino, and Darknon Station was strategically located along the Itani Run. Thalassa Tarkin named Port Tarkin after her husband, and Keldaween has the Riftwalker compound and the East Spaceport. Tanab, Erudark, and Etoras all have spaceports, with the latter even boasting a medical facility. Galtea has a short-lived port with a farmer's market, and Dorin has Dorshan Spaceport, whose facilities were all indoors so off-worlders wouldn't die from the poisonous atmosphere. Gordon Prime has the military-grade Graith Starport, fortified for all your wartime needs, and Depatar was a discreet black market and smuggler's spaceport that was the only stop for anyone hoping to go into the Lost Souls asteroid field. Then there's Starlight Station, which was conveniently located but had exorbitant prices. The Fakir sector had Colonia Lyota spaceports, which were thankfully undamaged by a neighboring system going supernova. Merisi was a pharmaceutical producer, and its 3 ports, Merisi Agra, Merisi Dispatch, and Merisi Prime, facilitated the pharmaceuticals trade and had impressive medical facilities. Bardota has Jor-Un, a major port, and Garrel City Spaceport has a direct connection to Lothal. There's also Yinta Lake, Kishpog, and Tekar Spaceports, and Labour Outpost on Yavin 4. Additionally, we have the Morlus Spaceport, which is close to the Morlus Academy, Altoona Spaceport on Bethal, and Tapani Royal Spaceport in the Tapani sector. Mount Korvast on Sarapin, Tassarik, and Neshtub all have spaceports, as did Pieldi. Deneba has the Meru Spaceport, and Balnab has Balnab Spaceport. Finally, there's Capra Spaceport, designed after a Falcon, and Tikoe Spaceport on Aloxor. Findar had a spaceport and station, and Starport Touchdown was located on the moon Trilos. D tier is where things really start going downhill. The planets we've dumped in this tier are, to put it mildly, bad. They've all had terrible things happen to them, are in terrible locations, or just have nothing going for them. To no one's surprise, this is where we've put most of the Star Wars planets that were destroyed one way or another. Demophon and its ports, Bineport and Dalara Starport were completely obliterated by a supernova, whereas New Plimpto's Cadgal Meadows, Femis, and Lowport were ravaged by the Yuuzhan Vong, as was Cernpidal's Starport. Azure and its spaceport were destroyed by the Separatists, and the Borovlo cloning facility was abandoned by the Kaminoans, who then went extinct. The Enclave, an Imperial spaceport on Kile 2 was destroyed by Rogue Squadron, Jeddah City Spaceport was wiped out by the Death Star, and Cheloa's Geneth Spaceport was destroyed by the Sith Lord Daemon's shenanigans. Then there's the planet Taris, which had once been a thriving ecumenopolis before the Jedi Civil War saw it reduced to mostly toxic waste, resulting in it and its ports, Highport and Olaris Spaceport, being vastly undesirable places to visit. Finally, Solonia was also half destroyed, so we'll include its El Puak Den port here, even if it is a core world. Another category we've delegated to D tier are all the shadowports of the galaxy, barring a few more prestigious ones. These are all the hubs of underworld activity that lack the fun diversions that a place like Nar Shaddaa might offer. First off is Oasis City on Darvanis, the OG hub of scum and villainy. Abalor was a smuggler's port, as were Point Bianco, Point Nadir, and Oubliette, a shadowport hidden on Ord Vaxel. There's also Pavilion Port and Borgo Prime, which was located on an asteroid in the Outer Rim. Meanwhile, Luskin's Landing was an underground spaceport on Andasala that primarily serviced the Spice Run, and Ord Mantell, Ord Segra, Fort Divin on Ord Antalaha, and Ord Minok were infamous, including the Jubilee Wheel, a space station above Ord Mantell. If you've watched Kenobi, you're also familiar with the Daiyu City Spaceport, which was the hub of Death Sticks and Inquisitor activity shown in the series. Finally, there's Beliar on the moon Net, which got blockaded because two corporations decided to fight and used it as a leverage. Next up, we have spaceports that were just in terrible locations, or otherwise terrible places to be. That includes places like Dathomir Spaceport and an abandoned port in the Anawat system that was one giant penitentiary. Bakar Spaceport was in the middle of a desert, and Betha 2 Starport was carved into the cliffs of a barren, dry rock. Almania, with the Coruscant and Drewa spaceports, were an awful place to live, out in the Outer Rim and ruled by a tyrannical caste. Dvoran, on the other hand, was a free-floating planet that devoured anything in its path, and the only thing on the world was its tiny spaceport. Kularin has Gadron Spaceport, which exported its exotic hardwoods, and Caligolos 5 had an eponymous spaceport that was surrounded by swampland. Equally stinky was Shenodra Spaceport on Bamayar, which was most famous for its foul odor. Kronex Spaceport in the Lion Nebulae has a variety of cantinas to offer, and nothing more. And finally, to wrap up this tier list, we have the bottom of the barrel, the scum of the pond. We've only kept two types of spaceport for this bottommost tier. The first type of spaceports we've condemned to tier list hell are those that were actively collaborating with the Galactic Empire. Just as we rewarded other spaceports for fighting against tyranny, we're going to condemn those that facilitated the Empire's policies. This included a Carlo station on Sulon, Al Yuen Spaceport, which hosted an Imperial garrison, Fortuna Spaceport on Edan 2, Andelm 4 and Kaladas Spaceport, and Denexar's B-Dock, which had contingencies of stormtroopers on staff, and the Selenon Spaceport and Gal Spaceport that serviced Imperial military needs. There's also Krindin Spaceport on Zelos 2 and Hokaleg Spaceport, which housed the Imperial Tarkin superweapon. Iskayuma Spaceport on Rhodia and Industrial Starports on Lazarian 4, which both housed an Imperial garrison, was off limits to most visitors, and Horizon Base provided shipping and refueling for the Empire. Hanestia's landing yard on Hanestia paid tribute to the Empire, and the Ilmek Island Spaceport held an Imperial outpost. Kosia's Spaceport was also used as housing for Imperial personnel. Reviar Station on Revia and Rigton Spaceport on Nalol both held Imperial bases. We also have Trevelis on Callistas, Aleron Starport, an Imperial-class starport, Cal Starport, which held the Imperial Office of Customs, and Mondor Spaceport, which contained Imperial Pad 639. And finally, there's Lao and Dentani Starports, the J-Law docking facilities, Lazaria City Spaceport, Kabaria's Eponte Spaceport, and Garki's Imperial Starport. These starports may have been functional, and some even in decent locations, but they get an L for being associated with the Empire. The other category of spaceports we've placed in this tier are, unfortunately, those we know almost nothing about. So many of Star Wars' spaceports were only mentioned in a throwaway line in some comic. Since even their creators didn't care about them, we've dumped them all in F tier for your viewing displeasure. Most of these ports were eponymous with their planets, so we'll include them only where it matters. We'll start with Acre's spaceport on Mon Gaza, Soleil spaceport, and Aquilei's Anchorhead. Vandor has the Korubalny and Dolda spaceports, and Barankar port. There's Morjay, Mortgage, and Mud Station, and Montrol and Montu Cordo spaceports. Actleon Cityport and Nabat spaceport follow, along with North Polar spaceport on Oseon 6845, an asteroid. Makumte has the Makumte spaceport and Sinjia station, and Shell Konwa has the Makrin Main and Greencliff regional spaceport. There's also the Albaldus and Alatakar spaceports, the spaceports of Balumbra and Belazura, and Dazanma spaceport on Dekian. Guangdin spaceport was underwater, and Gamor has Jugsmuck station. Knocking them all out at once, we have ports Duggan, Epsilon, Ferroli, Halib, Hoshim, Kala, Port Esther, and Port of Otega. Also included are the Strilor, Rifrax, Revos, Prosperity, and Runadun spaceports, Plateau City and Picotorian spaceport, Bilvren, Palisade, and Roma starports. Torina has Brindaba spaceport, Cantonica has Canto Bight, and Cullo has Chafflock spaceport. Continuing on the same vein, there's Sontul, Ronafaven, and Pelkonen spaceports, Bowledge Downport, and Byblos starport. Danuta has Trid spaceport, Burning Con has the Con Nevo spaceport, Akia has the Mirror spaceport, and Wukar has Itla City spaceport. We also have the creatively named Docking Pad 28 on Gelgala, Docking Rectangle 16 on Sejansij, and Landing Point Tharak. With that, and Kal Shebol spaceports were out in the Cathol Rift, and Daharan spaceport was on Greyman's planet. There's Triton Beshport and Triv spaceport, and Troith spaceport, which was captured by the New Republic. Findar has the Greater Hub spaceport, and Essawin has Hilissa spaceport. There's also the Haven spaceport moon, Crimea, Shulel City and Stobar spaceports, Seswena City starport, and Singir station. We have the Holes, Huangshul, Formos, Halmad, and Doruma spaceport, In-Japan Highport, Janos, Tazan, Alenba, Justa, and Dulin spaceports, and Dreplin port on Glover. Tegan had Gunung spaceport. Chazwa has Iritsa spaceport, Serpa has Jaisel, then there's Calandus 7 and Koke Frost, Kinkosa, Corbin, and Kothlis starports, Kuplob Springs on Tenu, Kul Kanada on Blurrum, and Konmin spaceport on Baldemnik. Gelafon also has Kigdanen spaceport, which was its capital, and Narg starport serviced Narg. We have Yefor and Warren Station. Lord City and Munda were both spaceports, and Merud has the Memorial spaceport. Score 2 has the Metrobig Interplanetary Blastport, Holmina has Quart Zedge Port, and Toshara has Miragana spaceport. There's also Lasco Port, the Off-Worlders Quarter starport, and Nixor spaceport, as well as the Ontotho, Osu, and Kina spaceport. Yavatsiri, Veshka City, Valtros, and Carfedian spaceports follow Velia Station and Pav's Keshri City. We also have Voktunma, Vespara, Vermuda, and Verena starports, as well as Venkaria starport on Kifex. And finally, there's Mamkota spaceport, Tula and Ithaqua spaceports on Tula, Isera, Travnin, Jozan, Toduaha, and Thun spaceport, Yanibars Thoyola port, Landing Nest on Lo Uran, Tamorzand and Tatara, and Trelbio Tower. So that's it for today, guys. We hope you enjoyed this comprehensive, 100% objective tier list. If there's anything else you'd like us to rank in painstaking detail, let us know in the comments section below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. and I hope to see you in the next video.